Music, slow, melancholic piano, underscored by the distant chirping of crickets. My hands. They always talked about my hands, calloused, deeply grooved, stained with the earth's richness and the sun's relentless kiss. For 50 years I'd walked these rows, felt the soil breathe beneath my boots, listened to the vines whisper secrets only the oldest among us could understand. This vineyard, it was more than just land. It was the story of my life, my father's life before me, the dreams we planted, watered, and watched grow, pushing towards a sky that sometimes felt too far away. But then they came, the city folks, the ones who smelled of expensive cologne and entitlement. They owned, well, they owned the names on the deeds, the glossy brochures, the promises of prestige. It was harvest season. The air was thick with the sweet perfume of ripe grapes. A good year, a blessed year. I was overseeing the final picking, my worn hands deftly separating the perfect clusters. My grandson, young Elijah, was with me. His eyes, bright and curious, were mirroring my own pride. He loved this place as much as I did. That's when they arrived, Mr. Sterling and his entourage. Sterling and Sterling they called themselves. Bought up half the valley, they said, ready to modernize, ready to streamline, ready to make their mark. They swept in, their expensive shoes crunching on the gravel path, a stark contrast to my worn leather. Sterling himself, a man with a face like a sneer permanently etched in place, stopped dead when he saw me. His eyes, cold and small, raked over me. Then they landed on my hands. He chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that scraped against the peaceful hum of the harvest. "My word," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. He nudged one of his associates, a younger man in a blindingly white suit. "Look at those things, like a couple of old coal shovels." The younger man joined in the laughter, a sharp, cruel sound. "Been digging for gold, old man?" another sneered. "Or maybe just digging your own grave." Elijah, standing beside me, shifted uncomfortably, his small shoulders hunched. I felt a familiar ache, a phantom pain that had followed me for decades, the sting of being seen, not as a man, but as an object, an obstacle, a relic. Sterling, emboldened by his companion's amusement, stepped closer. He gestured to my hands, still dusted with the faint purple hue of the grapes. "You know," he said, his gaze still fixed on my work-worn fingers, "we're looking for a new aesthetic, something cleaner, more sophisticated. Those hands, they just don't fit the brand. They speak of labor, of the past." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. "Perhaps it's time for you to retire. Find a nice little plot somewhere else. This is business after all." The laughter died down, replaced by an expectant silence. They were waiting, waiting for me to shrink, to apologize, to disappear. But they didn't know me. They didn't know the years I'd poured into this soil, the sweat, the tears, the silent battles I'd fought to keep this place alive. They saw hands, stained and rough. They saw a man, black and old. They didn't see the roots. They didn't see the strength. They didn't see the legacy. I looked at Elisha. His small face was a picture of confusion and hurt. I straightened my back. My heart, usually a steady drum, beat a little faster, not with fear, but with something else, something that had been simmering for a very long time. I took a deep breath, the scent of grapes filling my lungs. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice calm, surprisingly steady. "You're right about one thing." His sneer deepened, expecting my capitulation. "These hands," I continued, holding them up, letting the sunlight glint off the dirt beneath my nails. "They have done a lot of work. They have built this. and they are about to do something else. Music, a subtle shift, a hint of foreboding, the piano melody becoming more resolute. They looked at each other, bewildered. Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Not my work-worn one, but a hand that now held a quiet authority. "You see," I said, my gaze sweeping over their expensive suits and self-satisfied faces. "You're worried about the brand, about the aesthetic, about what these hands represent to you." I let the silence stretch, thick with unspoken tension. The crickets seemed to quiet down. The wind rustled the leaves as if listening. "Well," I said, a slow smile finally gracing my lips, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "Let me tell you what these hands represent to me." Music, a soft lingering note fading into silence. Scene. The sun beats down on the dusty vineyard. The air is thick with the scent of ripe grapes and something else, something sour and bitter. My hands, calloused and stained by years of earth, are resting on the worn wooden fence. It's a familiar ache, a dull throb that's more a part of me than my own heartbeat. The laughter, sharp and brittle like breaking glass, cuts through the afternoon quiet. It's the vineyard owners, Mr. Abernathy and his son, young Mr. Abernathy. They're standing by their gleaming imported car, their expensive suits looking out of place amongst the vines. They've been eyeing me all morning, their smiles tight and condescending. "Mr. Abernathy, O.S. Look at those hands, boys. Like old tree roots, aren't they?" His son chuckles, a dry, rasping sound. I can feel their eyes on me, dissecting me, measuring me, and finding me wanting. It's the same look I've seen my whole life. The look that says, "You don't belong here." The look that dismisses years of sweat and dedication as mere dirt. My knuckles are swollen, the skin cracked and dry from a lifetime of sun and soil. These aren't just hands that worked. These are hands that birthed life from the earth, hands that coaxed sweetness from the vine, hands that built something from nothing. They've held my wife, my children, my dreams, and they see them as common, unworthy. Young Mr. Abernathy. Must be exhausting, old man, all that. Digging. The words are soft, almost a whisper, but they land like a blow. Old man. It's not just about age. It's about obsolescence. It's about being seen as a relic, something to be discarded when its usefulness is over. My grip tightens on the fence. The wood splinters slightly under my touch. I don't turn around. I don't need to. I can feel the weight of their judgment, the arrogance radiating off them. It's a familiar burden, a familiar weight I've carried for so long. It's become second nature. But today, something feels different. A quiet ember, long dormant, has begun to stir within me. It's not anger, not exactly. It's a cool, steady resolve. I close my eyes for a brief moment, picturing my grandmother's hands, strong, capable hands that kneaded dough and soothed fevers. I remember my father's hands, thick and powerful, that built our first home with his own sweat. These hands, they are a legacy, and no amount of mockery can erase that. My thoughts, they see dirt, they see labor, they see a man destined to toil and disappear. They don't see the roots, they don't see the history, they don't see the ownership. I take a slow, deep breath, the scent of grapes now mingling with the dust. The sun feels less like an oppressor and more like a witness. I can feel the vibrations of their smug satisfaction, their utter conviction of their superiority. It's a well-worn path, this feeling of being less than. But the end of that path is changing, ever so subtly. I finally turn, slowly, deliberately. My gaze meets young Mr. Abernathy's, then drifts to his father. The sneer on his face is still there, but there's a flicker of something else now. a hint of unease. They expect me to shrink, to apologize, to avert my eyes. But I don't. I simply stand there, a silent silhouette against the sun-drenched vines, my stained hands resting against my worn trousers. The quiet hum of the vineyard seems to hold its breath, waiting. My thoughts. They think these hands are just for digging. They think they know my story. They think they've seen the whole picture. They are wrong, so profoundly, deliciously wrong. A slight smile touches my lips, a small private victory. It's a smile that holds the weight of decades, the sting of countless indignities, and the promise of a reckoning. The game they believe is theirs, but they haven't even seen the board yet, and I am about to flip it over. The air hung thick with a kind of quiet arrogance. It wasn't the kind you could point to, not a shouted word or a glaring stare. It was in the way Mr. Sterling's eyes skimmed over me like I was a speck of dust on his perfectly polished boots. He'd just finished his little spiel about unforeseen circumstances and difficult decisions. My contract, a handshake deal forged over years of honest work, suddenly meant nothing. He pushed the document across the oak table. It was a termination notice. No cause, just a polite cold severing. My stomach tightened. It felt like the sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving everything in shadow. My hands, calloused and stained from years of nurturing these vines, were clenched under the table. I looked at them. They'd seen more sunrises and storms than Mr. Sterling had probably seen in his entire pampered life. They were the hands of a man who understood the earth, who coaxed life from the soil, who understood growth and patience. I don't understand, I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. We had an agreement. He gave a dismissive wave. Agreements change, Elias. The market's shifting. We're bringing in new talent, people with a more modern approach. His gaze flickered to my hands again, then quickly away, as if they were something distasteful. A faint smirk played on his lips. I saw it. I always saw it. That subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of disdain. It was the same look I'd seen on so many faces. The unspoken message that a black man, an old black man, with hands like these, couldn't possibly be part of something as refined as his prestigious vineyard. He stood then, signaling the end of our audience. I'm sorry it's worked out this way. The best of luck to you, Elias. The words were as hollow as a dried-out gourd. He turned and walked towards the large glass doors that overlooked the rolling hills of his estate, his expensive shoes clicking a triumphant rhythm on the polished floor. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He thought he had won. He thought he had erased me, just like that. I stayed seated for a moment longer. The silence in the office was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning. I could feel the weight of his dismissal settling on me, heavy and suffocating. But then a different feeling began to rise. It wasn't anger, not entirely. It was something colder, something sharper. It was the memory of my grandmother, her own hands worn smooth from working in fields that weren't her own. It was the memory of my father, his back stooped from back-breaking labor, dreaming of a future he had never seen. It was the memory of every quiet indignity I and so many others had endured. I finally stood. My knees creaked a little, a protest against the years. I looked at the termination notice on the table. It was just a piece of paper. And I, Elias Thorne, was more than just a gardener. I was a root, sunk deep into this land, far deeper than Mr. Sterling would ever understand. He thought he was ending my story. He had no idea he was just turning the page. I walked out of his office, my steps slow and deliberate. I didn't run. I didn't plead. I simply walked. And as I stepped out into the bright, unforgiving sunlight, I felt a quiet, resolute purpose settle within me. The game, Mr. Sterling, was far from over. It was just beginning to change hands. Scene start. Intos. Vineyard office. Day. The air in the office is thick with the cloying scent of expensive cologne and condescending smiles. The polished mahogany desk gleams under the recessed lighting, a stark contrast to the weathered, earthy tones of the vineyard outside. Mr. Sterling, the owner, a man whose face has seen more facelifts than seasons, sits behind it. Beside him, his son, Brock Sterling, oozes entitlement like cheap perfume. They are surrounded by a few other men in sharp suits, their faces a mixture of amusement and disdain. I stand before them, the dirt still clinging to my worn boots. My hands, the ones they'd so crudely mocked, are balled into fists at my sides. The words they spoke still echo in my ears, a cruel symphony of dismissal. "Look at those hands," Brock had sneered, his voice dripping with disgust. "Like a slave's. Probably never done a day's real work in his life." My heart, a steady drumbeat of resilience, had faltered for a moment. But then, a flicker, a memory, the calloused skin, the ingrained earth, the ache in my joints. They were not badges of servitude, but medals of a life earned, a legacy built with sweat and perseverance. Mr. Sterling clears his throat, the sound like pebbles shifting. "So, Mr. Johnson, was it? We've had a look at your proposal. Frankly, we're not impressed. Your methods are antiquated. Your yields are inconsistent. We were expecting something more sophisticated." He gestures vaguely at a sleek modern tablet on his desk, displaying complex charts and graphs that mean little to the man who understands the language of soil and sun. Brock chuckles, a low, unpleasant sound. "Yeah, Pops, this guy's still stuck in the dark ages. We're talking cutting-edge agricultural technology here, not mud pies." I look at my hands. They tell a different story. They speak of generations who coaxed life from this very land. My grandfather, who planted the first vines here, his hands, just like mine, strong and capable. My father, who expanded the vineyards, his spirit as unyielding as the granite beneath the soil. And me, Silas Johnson, who inherited their vision, their struggle, and their deep abiding love for this place. They see dirt. I see sustenance. They see weariness. I see wisdom. They see a servant. They have no idea. I take a slow breath, the scent of the vineyard's own rich earth filling my lungs. It's a scent they've forgotten, a scent of honest labor and honest success. "Mr. Sterling," I say, my voice calm, a ripple on a still lake. "You mentioned sophisticated methods. You mentioned technology." Mr. Sterling leans back, a patronizing smile playing on his lips. "Indeed, we're talking AI-driven irrigation, drone surveillance, climate-controlled greenhouses, the future of viticulture." "The future," I repeat, nodding slowly. "That's important. But what about the foundation? What about the roots?" I glance out the large window, towards the rolling hills of vines that stretch as far as the eye can see. They are vibrant, green, heavy with promise. Brock rolls his eyes. "What are you even talking about? We're here to discuss business, not poetry." "My proposal," I continue, ignoring him, "is about more than just yields. It's about the land itself. It's about understanding its history, its needs." I meet Mr. Sterling's gaze, and for the first time, I see a flicker of something other than amusement in his eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or a hint of unease. "You see these hands," I say, holding them up, palms facing them. "They've worked this soil for over 60 years. They've felt every drought, every frost, every bounty. They know this land in a way no algorithm ever could." Mr. Sterling shifts in his seat. "We appreciate your dedication, Mr. Johnson, but we are looking for a more modern partnership. one that aligns with our vision for growth. He pronounces modern as if it's a sacred word, a spell to ward off anything less than dazzling white teeth and shallow ambition. I can feel the tension coiling in the room. They expect me to shrink, to apologize, to retreat with my antiquated hands and my inconsistent methods. But I've walked too far down this road to turn back now. Growth, I echo. A very interesting word. Tell me, Mr. Sterling, when you speak of growth, are you referring to the growth of your portfolio or the growth of this land? Mr. Sterling frowns. Naturally, both. It's a symbiotic relationship. Symbiotic, I muse. And yet, you dismissed my offer without even understanding what I truly bring to the table. You saw the hands and you saw a label. You saw a past and you assumed a lack of future. Brock scoffs. What are you, a philosopher now? We've got a deal with Harvest Prime ready to sign this afternoon. They're offering top dollar for our grapes this season. You're holding us up for no reason. Harvest Prime. The name hangs in the air, heavy with corporate jargon. I know Harvest Prime. They're one of the biggest buyers in the region, known for their aggressive tactics and their preference for certain kinds of suppliers. Harvest Prime, I say softly. Yes, a significant buyer. They have specific requirements, don't they? I let my gaze drift back to the vineyard outside, the sunlight glinting off the clusters of ripening grapes, each one a testament to time, to patience, to an understanding that goes beyond quarterly reports. Mr. Sterling's eyebrows rise slightly. He seems to be sensing a shift, a subtle current beneath the surface of our conversation. He's used to people cowering before his wealth, not questioning his decisions. They do, Mr. Sterling concedes, a hint of irritation creeping into his voice. But those requirements are standard for a producer of our caliber. Standard, I repeat, a faint smile touching my lips, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, but hints at a storm gathering on the horizon. And what if I told you, Mr. Sterling, that the grapes from my vineyards are not only of the highest caliber, but are also contractually obligated to a buyer who values authenticity and exclusivity above all else? A buyer who wouldn't dream of dealing with Harvest Prime ever again? The silence that follows is deafening. Brock's smirk has vanished. Mr. Sterling's patronizing demeanor has evaporated, replaced by a stark, dawning realization. The polished mahogany desk suddenly seems less like a symbol of power and more like a fragile barrier about to be breached. Scene end. Sound of wind rustling through leaves, distant murmur of voices. My hands. They always focused on my hands, calloused, stained with the earth, the lines etched deep, not from age, but from years. Years spent toiling, years spent tending, years spent making this land bloom, a beauty I poured my soul into, while others only saw the dirt under my fingernails. They didn't see the sweat. They didn't see the ache. They didn't see the quiet pride when a vine yielded its first perfect cluster of grapes. They just saw a gardener, a laborer, someone to be dismissed. I remember Mr. Henderson, his voice dripping with that condescending sweetness they reserve for people like me. Remarkable, aren't they, Thomas? Your hands, so seasoned. He'd gestured, not at the sprawling rows of emerald vines, but at my knuckles, rough as bark. The younger ones, the ones in their sharp suits, they'd snickered. Their laughter, a thin, sharp sound, like glass shattering. It was at the annual harvest gala, the air thick with the scent of ripening fruit and expensive perfume. I'd been there all day, as always, overseeing, making sure the harvest was perfect, just like every year for 50 years. I was just part of the scenery, the fixture that was always there, always working, always invisible, until it wasn't. Mr. Sterling, his face a mask of entitlement, had a problem with a delivery. He was yelling, his voice echoing across the manicured lawns. He needed someone to blame, and my weathered face, my stooped shoulders, made me the easiest target. He pointed. You, gardener! You people are always so careless. Look at these grapes. Damaged. This whole shipment is ruined because of your incompetence. I stood there. The murmurs around me grew. A wave of heat rose in my chest, not of anger, but of a deep, weary sadness. I'd heard it all before, the subtle digs, the overt insults, but this time it felt different. The sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, and I felt a shift, a quiet settling within me. The young man, he was Mr. Sterling's nephew, I think. He stepped forward, emboldened by his uncle's rage. He smirked. Yeah, Grandpa, you really ought to get those hands checked out. Maybe get a manicure. He mimicked me, bending his own soft, unblemished fingers. That was the moment. Not the insult, but the way he said it. The dismissiveness, the utter lack of respect. It was as if I was not a man, but an object, a tool. I looked at my hands then, not with shame, but with a strange new clarity. These hands had planted the first saplings. These hands had coaxed life from barren soil. These hands had learned the secrets of the earth, the language of the vines. Better than any ledger or contract, these hands had built this, and these hands were about to speak. I took a deep breath. The scent of crushed grapes filled my lungs. I let the wind carry away the sting of their words, and then I looked up, not at the ground, but at their faces, all of them, the sneering nephew, the furious Sterling, the hushed crowd. These hands, I said, my voice steady, surprisingly strong, have held more profit in their palms than you will ever see in your lifetimes. Silence. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the gala. They looked at me, then at each other, confusion replacing their smugness. The nephew's smirk faltered. Mr. Sterling sputtered. What are you talking about, old man? Sterling demanded, his face purpling. I didn't answer him directly. I turned, slowly, and began to walk towards the grand pavilion, where the most important guests were gathered. The murmuring followed me, a ripple of unease. I saw the security guards hesitate, unsure if they should stop the old gardener who had suddenly found his voice. As I approached the pavilion, I saw the heads of the major distributors, the investors, the buyers. Their faces, usually so jovial and self-important, were now etched with surprise. They knew me, of course, as the groundskeeper, the one who always fetched their coats, who cleared their tables, who never made eye contact. I stopped in front of the largest table, the one where Mr. Sterling himself was holding court, beaming for the cameras. He looked up, annoyance flashing in his eyes. Thomas, what is the meaning of this interruption? I ignored him. My gaze swept across the faces at the table. Gentlemen, I said, my voice carrying clearly, I understand there have been some misunderstandings regarding the ownership of this vineyard. A hush. The camera lights seemed to dim. The wind died down. Mr. Sterling, I continued, my voice now a low rumble, filled with an ancient power. You have been managing my inheritance for the last 30 years, and frankly, your management has been disappointing. Mr. Sterling's jaw went slack. The nephew, standing a few feet away, let out a choked gasp. The carefully curated facade of the gala began to crack, revealing the rot beneath. They had mocked my hands. They had belittled my presence. They had treated me as less than dirt. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. The dirt was mine, and the vineyard, every single perfect grape was mine too. Sound of a single resonant chime. I watched the panic bloom on their faces, the confusion, the dawning horror. They had built their arrogance on a foundation of my silence, and now that foundation was about to crumble. The deals, the contracts, the promises they had made in my name, all of it was about to be reassessed. Sound of wind picking up again, more insistent. This was not just about words. This was about deeds. My deeds. The deeds that had been etched into the very soil of this land. And soon, everyone would know. Everyone would understand. Fade out. The air in the tasting room felt thick, a cloying sweetness of expensive wine and unspoken contempt. Mr. Sterling, his face a road map of arrogance, gestured dismissively towards me. His words, though polite on the surface, were a barbed wire wrapped around my heart. "Your hands, old man," he'd said, "they speak of a life spent toiling in the dirt. Not exactly the image we want, associated with our prestige vintage." The snickers from his entourage were like tiny shards of glass. My own hands, these hands that had coaxed life from stubborn soil, that had pruned vines under scorching sun and gentle rain, that had cradled fragile new shoots. These hands, worn and calloused, were a testament to dedication, to a lifetime of intimate connection with the very earth that produced this prestige vintage. But to them, they were just dirt, proof of my inferiority. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. Inside, a storm brewed. Memories flashed. My father's weathered hands, his quiet dignity as he worked the land. My own dreams, nurtured under that same sky. Hopes that had taken root and grown. Just like these vines, they saw a laborer. They saw a relic. They didn't see the foundation. They didn't see the ownership. Sterling continued, oblivious to the tremor building within me. He spoke of contracts, of quarterly reports, of market value. Each word was a hammer blow, chipping away at the thin veneer of respect they'd so carelessly placed. His gaze, when it flickered towards me, was one of mild impatience, as if I were a minor inconvenience in his grand design. He wanted to renegotiate. He wanted to squeeze me. He wanted to modernize my operation, which in his language meant taking it all for himself. I listened. I let his pronouncements wash over me. The rich aroma of the wine seemed to mock me, a manufactured opulence built on a legacy he didn't understand. He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was the master of this domain. He saw the gardener. He never once considered the gardener owned the garden. My heart, once a fluttering bird of unease, began to beat with a steady, powerful rhythm. The warmth of the sun on my face, felt even through the closed windows, was a familiar comfort. It was the same sun that had blessed my ancestors, that had seen generations of our family work this very soil. Sterling's world was built on paper and power plays. Mine was built on roots and resilience. He finished his preamble, a smug smile playing on his lips. He expected my submission. He expected me to cower, to plead. He expected the defeated gardener. But I wasn't just the gardener. I was more, so much more. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The tension in the room ratcheted up. The others shifted uncomfortably, sensing a shift in the atmosphere. Sterling's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Sterling," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, carrying an authority that seemed to surprise even myself. I looked him directly in the eye, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something akin to apprehension in his gaze. "You've spoken a great deal about this vineyard, about its prestige, its value." I paused, letting my words hang in the air. "You mentioned contracts, renegotiations." I held his gaze, a lifetime of quiet observations converging in that single moment. The worn lines on my face, the roughness of my hands, They were not marks of weakness. They were etchings of experience, of knowledge gained from the very ground he stood upon. You see these hands, Mr. Sterling. I raised my right hand, turning it slightly. The afternoon light caught the calluses, the ingrained earth. These hands have worked this land for 70 years. They've felt every stone, every drought, every miracle of a good harvest. I'll let that sink in. Sterling opened his mouth to speak, but I continued, my voice gaining a quiet strength. And these hands, Mr. Sterling, signed the deed. The room went silent. The clinking of wine glasses ceased. Sterling blinked, his eyes widening, a sudden pallor creeping over his carefully cultivated complexion. His entourage looked at him, then at me, confusion and dawning disbelief spreading across their faces. The deed, I repeated, my voice now a low rumble, like distant thunder. The deed to this entire vineyard, to every acre, every vine, every drop of wine produced here, signed and sealed. I smiled, a slow, deep smile that reached my eyes. My family's name is on every inch of this place, Mr. Sterling, has been for 3 generations. The smugness evaporated from Sterling's face, replaced by a look of utter shock. He sputtered, That's impossible. I've been dealing with your people for years, with the management, with the man you thought you could manipulate. I finished for him. With the man you assumed was just a hired hand. I looked around the room, at the stunned faces. Today, those deals you were so eager to renegotiate? They're cancelled, all of them, effective immediately. The air was no longer sweet with false prosperity. It was charged with a raw, undeniable truth. The power dynamics had not just shifted, they had been utterly, irrevocably overturned. Sterling, the man who had mocked my hands, stood before me, his own suddenly looking pale and useless. He had underestimated the roots, and now he was about to witness the harvest. But this harvest was his downfall, not mine. The implications of my words began to settle in the room. The future of this renowned vineyard, the deals that held so much sway in Sterling's world, were now entirely in my hands, the hands he had so carelessly dismissed. The weight of that decision, of this new reality, settled upon me, not as a burden, but as a profound, quiet strength. What would Sterling do now? And what would I do with this power? A power born from decades of quiet perseverance and a deep, unshakable love for the land. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to forge. The polished mahogany of the boardroom table felt cold under my fingertips, even through the thin fabric of my worn gloves. Each face around me was a mask of polite indifference, a carefully constructed barrier I'd encountered 1,000 times before. They saw the gardener, the laborer, the man whose hands had coaxed life from soil, not the man who held their future in his. Mr. Sterling, his tie a blinding shade of crimson, cleared his throat. "Mr. Davies," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we appreciate you coming, though, frankly, your presence here is unexpected. We had assumed the operations would continue under new management." He gestured vaguely, as if dismissing a bothersome fly. I didn't flinch. I'd learned long ago that outward composure was a shield. "New management?" I echoed, my voice steady. A ripple of unease went through the room. Sterling, usually so confident, hesitated. "Well, yes, the arrangements, the sale." He fumbled with a sheaf of papers. "We understood the vineyard was distressed." Distressed. The word tasted like ash. I thought of my father, his back bent under the same sun, his hands calloused and cracked, his quiet dignity in the face of every dismissive glance. I thought of the long nights spent poring over ledgers, the careful investments, the sacrifices made not just by me, but by generations before. They saw the dirt under my nails, not the solid earth I owned. I leaned forward, my gaze sweeping across each of them. The young executive, barely out of university, whose smirk had been particularly offensive earlier. The stern-faced accountant, whose eyes had flicked to my worn boots. The seasoned negotiator, who'd clearly underestimated the depth of my resolve. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping a notch, gaining a resonance that silenced the room. "Let's clarify. The vineyard is not distressed. In fact, it's never been more prosperous. And as for new management..." I paused, letting the silence stretch, heavy and electric. "You see, there was a misunderstanding. You were negotiating with a representative, not the owner." A collective intake of breath. Sterling's face, moments before a picture of smug control, contorted into disbelief, then alarm. "But the contracts," he stammered, holding up the papers as if they were a shield against reality. "The contracts were with a proxy," I stated, my tone hardening. "A courtesy, until I was ready." I reached into my inner coat pocket, pulling out a slim, leather-bound document. It wasn't a contract. It was a deed signed over to me years ago by a man who understood legacy, my father's legacy, and before him, his father's, the very land they were trying to absorb. "This," I said, laying the deed on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gavel strike, "is the original deed to Sterling Vineyards, registered in my name, and under my name, all outstanding agreements are now null and void." The air in the room crackled. The crimson tie seemed to lose its vibrancy against Sterling's ashen face. He stared at the deed, then at me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. The young executive's smirk had vanished, replaced by a look of stunned confusion. The accountant frantically flipped through his own notes, muttering under his breath. "Null and void?" Sterling finally managed, his voice a strangled whisper. "Every single one," I confirmed, my gaze unwavering. "The proposed acquisition, the supply chain agreements, the distribution channels, all cancelled, effective immediately." You see, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile. When you spend your life nurturing the soil, you learn patience. And you learn that sometimes the most valuable harvest isn't in the grapes, but in the roots. The silence that followed was profound. It was the silence of shattered assumptions, of roles reversed, of an entire foundation of perceived hierarchy crumbling around them. They looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. They saw not the gardener with the worn hands, but the architect of their downfall. And in their eyes, I saw a flicker of something I knew all too well: fear. The same fear I'd seen in the eyes of countless others who had underestimated the quiet strength of black hands. But this was just the beginning. The cancellations were signed. The deals were dead. Yet the true reckoning, the unraveling of their arrogance, was still to come. I stood, the leather deed still on the table, a testament to a power they had never bothered to acknowledge. The room felt suddenly smaller, their expensive suits suddenly ill-fitting. The game had changed, and they were no longer in control. Fade in, the opulent tasting room. The silence is thick, heavy. The wealthy vineyard owners, their faces a mask of stunned disbelief, stare at Silas. The younger man, the one who had sneered, looks pale, his arrogance crumbling like dry earth. Silas stands tall, a quiet strength radiating from him. His worn hands, the very ones they had mocked, rest calmly on the polished table. The wine glasses gleam, untouched, reflecting the stark reality of the moment. Silas, his voice, though quiet, carries the weight of years. It's not a shout, but a pronouncement. You see these hands? They've dug this soil for 40 years. They've coaxed life from this earth when others gave up. You see the calluses? The ingrained dirt? That's not a sign of weakness. It's a testament to commitment, to love, to ownership. He pauses, letting his words settle. The air crackles with unspoken accusations and dawning comprehension. Silas, you offered me a pittance, a beggar's purse for a king's bounty. You thought you could dictate terms to the man who knows every vine, every root, every whisper of the wind that crosses these hills. You underestimated me. You underestimated the generations who built this place with sweat and hope, not with inherited silver spoons. He looks directly at the younger man, a flicker of pity in his eyes, quickly replaced by a steely resolve. Silas, the deal is off. All of it. Every contract, every handshake, every promise you thought you had secured. Consider them null and void. You will not profit from my legacy. Not one drop of this vintage will be tainted by your greed. He turns his gaze to the other owners, their faces etched with a mixture of anger and fear. They are used to being in control, to wielding their power like a cudgel. Now, they are the ones being disarmed. Silas, I don't need your money. I don't need your validation. What I need is for people to understand that respect is earned, not given, and that sometimes the most valuable things are built by hands that look like mine, hands that have known hardship but never despair. He takes a slow, deliberate sip of the wine, the rich ruby liquid swirling in the glass. It's a gesture of quiet triumph, a silent declaration of victory. Silas, you came here to inspect your future harvest. Instead, you've witnessed the past reclaiming its rightful place. The contracts are terminated. You are no longer welcome on this land. The guards will escort you out. He gestures subtly towards the entrance. Two imposing figures, unseen until now, step forward. Their presence is a silent, irrefutable force. The vineyard owners, their faces a mixture of humiliation and rage, are forced to comply. They gather their belongings, their expensive suits, suddenly feeling out of place in the face of such raw, unyielding power. Silas, as they shuffle out, he speaks again, his voice a low murmur that still reaches them. Remember these hands. Remember the man you tried to dismiss, because you will see them again. And when you do, they will be holding more than just a pruning shear. They will be holding the keys to everything you thought you could take. He watches them go, the heavy oak door closing with a resounding thud, sealing their exit. The room is quiet again, but the silence is different now. It's a silence of respect, of a reckoning. He turns and walks towards the large window, gazing out at the sprawling vineyards. The setting sun casts a golden hue over the land, illuminating the vines like threads of precious metal. He can almost feel the earth beneath his feet, a deep, resonant connection that transcends any legal document or whispered insult. He knows this is just the beginning. The fight is far from over, but, for the first time in a long time, he feels the sweet, potent taste of justice on his tongue. He closes his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. It's a tear of sorrow for the past, but also a tear of triumph for the present, and a quiet promise for the future. The story is not over. There are still debts to be paid, and a legacy to be fully claimed. The sun dips below the horizon, and a new chapter begins to unfold.